mean for the former president going forward, and how will this conviction impact his presidential bid, his second presidential bid? Joining us now to discuss this and more, Professor Jonathan Enton, Professor Emeritus at the School of Law at the Case Western Reserve. Professor Enton, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Let me begin by asking you, what were the grounds which really clinched this case against Donald Trump?
The prosecution put on a fair number of witnesses and a large number of documents to support their case. So they didn't rely only on Michael Cohen, who has a track record of not telling the truth. And so the prosecution was able to tell a fairly coherent story about how all of the facts fit together. And that's, I think, what really made the difference, particularly because the Trump defense team did not have as coherent a theory to explain what was going on. And although they don't legally have to have an alternative story, as a practical matter, in a criminal trial, the defense usually needs to have a reasonably good story in order to raise what the law calls reasonable doubt in the minds of the jurors.
Right. Does this conviction come with a possible jail term? Can Donald Trump go to jail on these charges?
He could, in the sense that the law that he is accused of violating provides for a criminal sentence, but he very likely will not go to jail because this kind of law for a first offender, a nonviolent crime, generally it's unusual to have jail time. He is more likely to be fined and put on probation, which is pretty much the typical way that these kinds of first-time low-level nonviolent felony offenses are sentenced.
Right. Now, in terms of appealing this this conviction and this possible sentence, what's the road ahead? What are the levels that he can appeal on?
Well, there are two levels of appeal within the New York State court system. There is an intermediate court of appeals, and that's where the case will go in the first instance. Then, if Trump loses at the intermediate court, he can file an additional appeal to the highest court in New York State. And as a practical matter, the highest court in New York State is the last word on the meaning of state law, and this case arose under state law. If Trump loses at that level, he could try to get the U.S. Supreme Court to review the case, although he would have to raise a kind of federal constitutional objection to his conviction in order for the U.S. Supreme Court to hear it.
Right. We also read reports coming out of the U.S. that this doesn't really disqualify him from fighting the presidential elections once again, and there's no law within the Republican Party which disqualifies him from fighting for elections once again. But does this impact his credibility? Will the Republican lawmakers, will the Republican Party be forced to rethink, or there is no such measure?
Well, I think it's very unlikely that the Republican Party will rethink its view of Trump. Trump's claim all along has been that this was a bogus charge and a rigged trial, and Republican leaders around the country seem to be rallying to that narrative. Where it might matter is for the comparatively small number of undecided voters for whom the conviction might tip their decision away from Trump. Now, whether that means that they would vote for President Biden or for a third-party candidate or an independent such as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is another matter. But I think for the most part, the conviction is likely to harden the views of people who like Trump and harden the views of people who don't like Trump. But there are a few folks in the middle where it could make a difference.
All right, the swing voters, so to say. Are there more criminal cases which Donald Trump is facing right now, where the trial or the sentencing, the conviction could happen now?
Well, Trump is facing 3 other trials. One in Georgia, where he is accused of trying to interfere with the vote count in the 2020 election. That's a state case. And then he is facing 2 federal criminal cases, one in Washington, D.C. that is connected to the January 6th events, and another one in Florida, which involves his keeping classified documents at Mar-a-Lago after he left the White House. But it does not seem as though any of those trials will happen before the election. And for that matter, I think it's not clear whether we'll get a decision on Trump's appeal in the New York case before the election. It just the process, it takes a certain amount of time. So I think this is likely the only trial that will happen before the election.
Right. So clearly it seems the Democrats have got a lot of ammunition in this election to attack Donald Trump and the Republican Party and tell their voters that this is the kind of person you would be electing if you vote for him. Do you think that this conviction gives Democrats an edge in the upcoming polls?
It might help them to some extent, but keep in mind that most Democrats already had a very low opinion of President Trump based on on his record when he was in office before and the sorts of things he's been saying for the last several years as he's campaigned for the Republican nomination this time around. So will it make a big difference? I'm not sure. It might make some difference. But Trump is the sort of candidate where very few people are neutral. And that was true even before this conviction.
Right. Professor Enton, thank you very much for joining us on Global Eye, explaining us the ramifications of the Trump conviction in the United States and what it means for his presidential bid. Thank you once again for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
On that note, we take a short break, but don't go anywhere. We will get you the latest on the elections in South Africa, in Mexico, and we'll also tell you about the Pakistan Prime Minister's upcoming visit to China. Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. South Africa went to polls on the 29th of May in what is seen as the most pivotal general election since the end of apartheid. The ruling party, African National Congress, led by South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, has won every election since the end of apartheid in 1994, when Nelson Mandela became the country's first black president. But this time around, things look a little different. ANC remains a top party in the counting, but it might lose some seats. The official opposition has come second in the past 5 elections and is on the second spot even this time. South Africa's Electoral Commission has 7 days to declare the final results by law. However, they are usually announced sooner than that. This year, the Commission has set Sunday, the 2nd of June, as the final results day. Joining us now to take this forward is Rajiv Bhatia, former Indian ambassador to South Africa and distinguished fellow at the Gateway House. Ambassador Bhatia, thank you very much for joining us. This is indeed a watershed moment in South Africa's history, isn't it? The African National Congress not being able to win a majority on its own.
Yes, indeed, Parikshit, this is correct. It's a democracy that is 30 years old, and this is the first time African National Congress seems to be heading and stopping below the 50% mark, which is supposed to be the mark of clear majority. So the importance is there, and it also very much indicates the political and economic journey that South Africa has covered in the past 3 decades.
Right. What do you think has changed, sir? Do you get a sense that the African National Congress, Cyril Ramaphosa, are losing popularity among younger voters, the new generation of South Africans, or is there a change in sentiment across the board?
Well, I think, the process of growing up for 3 decades, this was the party which remained unbeaten. Even now, it will still stay the party with the single largest number of votes and seats in the National Assembly. But 2 main things have happened. Number one, there has been a process of fragmentation or defection from the ANC. So 2 important parties which have come up, the party which is led directly by Jacob Zuma, the previous president, is a factor to reckon with. And then there is the party of economic freedom fighters. Both these parties are going to take something like 10% plus, each of them, from the original vote bank of ANC. And therefore, one party that used to be in the 50s or 60s is now going to be reduced to the mid-40s or lower 50s. Therefore, there is that process of fragmentation. And the second important point is that the performance by ANC government has been very much questioned and has been opposed. There's been a series of very important problems, mainly the economic woes of the people, the staggering unemployment, the question of corruption and crime. And essentially, it's a issue where ANC party has, as a party, it has frayed, and so the country is slowly getting ready for a change. I think this is the process of democracy growing up.
All right, process of democracy growing up. Now, in case there is a coalition in South Africa, will Cyril Ramaphosa continue to be the president, or do you see some other leader emerging in South African politics? So
that's a very thoughtful question. I think everything depends on the total number of votes that ANC secures. This is a country where proportional representation system applies. So as of now, when more than 50% votes have been counted, ANC is still running close to 42-43%. If they stay there at the end, it is possible that a leadership change may be pushed by some people and may have to be considered. But if they inch closer towards 48-49%, then the presidency may not change. So at this stage, it's a bit of an uncertain situation. But we already are hearing from South Africa that there will be people perhaps even within the ANC and certainly outside the ANC, who would push for a leadership change.
Right. Ambassador Bhatia, when it comes to Africa, several Indian companies have high stakes there, be it automobiles, you can talk about the Mahindra Group, Maruti Suzuki. Then when you speak about telecom, you've got Bharti Airtel. Where does the geopolitical loyalties lie as far as different candidates in the fray are concerned? What is it that Indian businesses will have to look forward to in South Africa in terms of this election? What are some of the cues that you're picking up?
India Inc. is very interested in what is going on in the major African economies. South Africa is, as of now, the largest African economy, and in fact, it has been the gateway for the injection and spread of Indian capital and enterprise in Africa. So what is happening in South Africa is very important. Of course, corporate leaders have been preparing that someday some change, significant change will come in South Africa. So at this stage, I suppose, like us, they must be watching very closely as to what the final outcome is. ANC has been quite friendly to the foreign companies, particularly those coming in from India. And in the last 30 years, India's economic profile has grown quite significantly. At this stage, they would be watching clearly whether South Africa, in the kind of coalition that develops, will still remain rightist in orientation, or whether it will shift its tendencies towards the leftist instincts of the polity. And therefore, I think if not by Sunday, by probably even tomorrow, the whole situation would become clearer. And as you rightly pointed out from your previous question, everything will depend on whether President Cyril Ramaphosa would continue to be at the helm. If not, then obviously everybody will have to go back to the design board.
Right. Ambassador, we do see South Africa facing a lot of corruption issues, electricity issues, power cuts that the common man there is facing. At the same time, Chinese investments in South Africa are very, very visible. There are a large number of Chinese banks operating there. And many of the projects have clear signboards saying that this is being done by a Chinese entity or a particular Chinese infrastructure bank for that matter. When it compares to Indian interests and economic interests in South Africa, how big is the Chinese investment in South Africa? And going forward, how will India have to grapple with that?
That is a question that both Indian policymakers and capitals of Indian industry have to tackle on a daily basis. There is absolutely no doubt that the Chinese economic presence across Africa has been strong, and it has actually been expanding. And it seems that despite very many negative tendencies in parts of the continent, China's economic push remains quite formidable. I think the challenge for the government and for business in India and in other competitive countries such as the US, EU, and Japan, it is the same. It is that you have to locate where your opportunities are, neutralize the negative trends and overcome them, and continue pressing your advantages. By this, essentially what I mean is that, overnight the African situation will not become 100% positive for you. You have to factor in the challenges and yet succeed. And obviously, you have to choose your domains carefully. In India's case, as you very rightly pointed out, Parikshit, in terms of the automobile sector, in pharmaceutical sector, in a number of electronic, small industry, medium industry enterprises, and above all these days, in terms of anywhere where digital technology is concerned, India still continues to have major opportunities in Africa, and therefore it is our duty, it's our endeavor, it has to be our endeavor to continue increasing and expanding the economic heft in our relationship. It is already happening, and I'm very optimistic that with the new government taking over in Delhi, our Africa policy will receive a strong fillip, and our experts have been giving a lot of advice on that to the government.
All right. Thank you very much, Ambassador Bhatia, for joining us. Yes, Africa is a big focus for the Indian government, and even for the next government after the 4th of June, it will be a big priority going forward. Meanwhile, Mexico is headed to polls on the 2nd of June, when nearly 100 million people will be called to vote. With 2 women leading the contest, the North American country is eyeing to elect its first female president. Several attacks against political candidates have been reported towards the end of campaigning, making it the most violent campaign period in the country's recent history. The former Mexico City Mayor, Claudia Sheinbaum, is the frontrunner, riding on a wave of popularity with the support of her longtime ally, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Trailing her in the polls is former Senator Jotel Galvez from the conservative PAN party, who is representing a coalition of opposition parties. High crime rate is a big concern in Mexico. Experts say the country is still reeling from historically high levels of homicides of around 30,000 people murdered each year. And that's the biggest challenge for the next president, to convince voters that she can end the near-certain impunity in Mexico, where around 95% of all crimes nationwide went unsolved in the country in 2022. Moving on to the other big international story. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is all set to visit China from the 4th of June to the 8th of June. The visit aims to boost the multi-billion-dollar China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. It was launched a decade ago, and several projects related to energy infrastructure had been already completed. Shehbaz Sharif also set up a meeting to prepare an action plan to encourage Chinese companies to set up industries in Pakistan. Joining us now to discuss this is Anant Krishnan, director at The Hindu. Anant has spent a lot of time reporting in China. Anant, thank you very much for joining us. Give us a sense of the significance of this visit, the timing for Pakistan and China.
Parikshit, as you rightly framed it, I think it's been said by both sides that it's a visit looking at the future of the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC, and what Pakistan has been billing as an ambitious phase 2 for CPEC. But I think below the surface, Parikshit, I think it's more about firefighting various issues that have crept into the China-Pakistan relationship, rather than a visit that's going to reflect the ambitions of the relationship. I think one big issue for the Chinese side is security of Chinese workers in Pakistan and of Chinese projects in Pakistan. It's been something that's flagged very recently when the Pakistani foreign minister was in Beijing. I think they're very unhappy with the level of security, which has been a big obstacle for Chinese companies there. Recently, this year, there was a bomb attack, a suicide bomb attack at one of the CPEC projects, a hydropower project, and 5 Chinese were killed in this attack, and 1 Pakistani as well. So that's been a big issue for the Chinese side. As for the Pakistani side, Parikshit, a number of Chinese loans are maturing. I think that's something that's a huge concern for the Shehbaz Sharif government, especially when the Pakistani economy is in such a bad shape. They've been looking for bailouts, and I think they're trying to strike a deal to defer some of the payments they owe to China. So I think there are a lot of issues below the surface that both sides will be looking to sort out.
Right. I'd also like to ask you now, in terms of the death of Chinese engineers in those suicide bomb attacks, do you get a sense that China is now likely to put more conditions to further loans to Pakistan for its infrastructure projects?
I think the sense I have is they're going to go slow on any new projects. I think it's more about securing what they already have. I think that the fact that it's been raised at a very high level by the Chinese side, in fact, Chinese President Xi Jinping specifically mentioned this issue of worker safety when the Pakistani Prime Minister visited in November 2022. And if you look at how China's diplomacy works, it's only these issues, when they're raised at the level of the president, it shows that they're very, very concerned about them. especially because this particular question of workers' safety in Pakistan has been going on for many years now, and they haven't really seen an improvement, and attacks have been recurring. So I think when this issue keeps cropping up, it's highly unlikely that China is going to go, deeper into Pakistan, open up new projects there. I think they're more concerned about securing current ones. And I think if you also look at domestic factors in China right now, Parikshit, which you've been following in terms of the Chinese economy, I think that I think the days of Chinese economic largesse in Pakistan are over.
Right. Also, when you're having elections in India, that is the day he's likely to, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is likely to reach Beijing. How do you think the Indian elections may figure in the conversations? And even if they don't, how do both the countries view view India right now?
I think what's been clear, Parikshit, is regardless of the economic troubles and economic limitations in the China-Pakistan relationship, it's been very clear, and I think this is something India has noticed as well, that strategically, militarily, we've seen a very clear deepening in China-Pakistan ties. I think that's been very, very clear. If you look at the kind of military engagement that's been going on, if you look at the exercises that have been happening between China and Pakistan, I think even if you look at, for example, recent reports that we've seen this week of China's support to Pakistan in terms of its military infrastructure and POK, I think these things are very clear. They point in one direction, that the strategic relationship is deepening. And I think it's part of a broader trend you've seen with the Xi Jinping government, where he's really gone all in with China's allies. You've seen that in the China-Russia relationship, and I think you're seeing that in the China-Pakistan relationship as well. And as far as India is concerned, and the new government that comes to power on June 4th, I think the China-Pakistan strategic relationship is going to be one of the pressing issues for India to tackle. That's been the case in the last 5 years, and I think that is going to be the case in the next 5 years as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Anant Krishnan, for joining us on the program, giving us a very important perspective on Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif's visit to China for 4 days. He will be meeting President Xi Jinping as well. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18 for more updates.